The war in the Warhammer 40,000 universe is absolute and all-encompassing. A lone infantryman on the battlefield is nothing more than a pawn. He is feeble, his lasgun only suitable against equally barely armoured wretches. It is said that the average lifespan of a guardsman on the front lines is a mere 15 hours. You can verify this if you wish. The Guard always needs volunteers. Headquarters receive reports from the fronts in torrents. Squads, platoons, companies are annihilated. 100,000 wounded, 50,000 more dead. The enemy has deployed weapons of mass destruction. The survivors are too exhausted, and there isn't enough time to dig mass graves. The stench of the dead clouds the sky. Their putrid blood defiles yet another world. An ordinary day of an ordinary campaign somewhere on the edge of eternal war. To drive a fragile human being who has witnessed this hell firsthand forward to fight can only be accomplished by the threat of immediate death. But what if a person has nothing left to lose? He moves forward and surrenders himself to the mercy of the Golden Throne. Sometimes, if the master of mankind is especially gracious to him, the person not only survives but becomes a celebrity, an idol for billions. Even more rarely, his name echoes throughout the Imperium. And today, we will indeed talk about such a fortunate one, if this word is even applicable to the inhabitants of the grim future. That Gaunt is an outstanding defender of humans is beyond doubt. But let's leave the worn clichés for the biographers and chroniclers. We will try to understand what truly grants a soldier genuine greatness. This is a complicated matter, and as always in such cases, we must begin from afar. I slept on my bed, covered in snowbark, and your plains are stained with my young blood. I will not be late for the battle and stand in the wide ranks. Take me, remake me, and forever lead me forward. Tales of Old Earth. The Imperium is not only a state, but a dream of it. From the first day when the Creator proclaimed the unity of terror and the armies of mankind poured into space, it began to be realized. The sudden end of the Great Crusade slowed its victorious advance, but the dream lived, breathed, and beat in millions of brave hearts. Okay, drop the misplaced pathos and let's say this. In the world of Warhammer, to stay alive, you must be ready for a good fight every second, or better attack yourself, so that the enemy whines, clutching their torn bellies. In the 35th millennium, humanity's personal reach extended to the future Sabbat worlds. This galaxy region lies on the edge of the vast segmentum Pacificus. It comprises over 100 star systems full of opportunities, treachery, and mysteries. Then, to conquer this uncharted space, myriads of brave souls and a living saint leading them into battle were needed. Oh, Sabbat, the beautiful angel of the Emperor! Then every child of the Imperium knew you. At your word, thousands died, and for every martyr, 5 others rose in their place. You yourself accepted the martyr's crown on Harkalon. The sacred mission of the saint continued its path after her demise. By the 38th millennium, former glory had faded, and heretics began to encroach upon the worlds of Sabbat. You know how it goes. Give corruption a finger, and it will take your entire hand. In the latter half of the 41st millennium, the impudence of the Chaos followers tipped the scales of the Emperor's divine patience, and his servants cast an entire crusade upon their heads. The archives that remain after it have yet to be thoroughly studied. But even now, it is clear that it was one of those great dramas that altered the course of history. 6 Space Marine chapters, over 50 regiments of the Astra Militarum, a fleet armada, and the Titans of the Mechanicus. However, more details about this great conflict can be found in the issue dedicated to the Sabbat Crusade. Today, our goal is different. The brutal galaxy is full of contradictions. Victory there celebrates scoundrels and bathes in the blood of the innocent. The worthy fall by a stray shot, and a bright future grows out of genocide. A more familiar picture, yes? Yet the reverse is also true. Wretched infantrymen, armed only with lasguns and bravery, turn back enemy hordes and change the course of an entire epoch. This is what the Imperium stood and will stand on those like the fighters of the 1st Tanith Regiment, the first and only. I am an Imperial Commissar. I will inspire the weak, support the wavering, lead those who have lost their way. I will become everything to those who need me, but I will also exact retribution on the incompetent, the cowards and the traitors without hesitation. Colonel Commissar Ibram Gaunt. Our entire character is rooted in childhood, and even for the best people there are no exceptions. The man named Ibram Gaunt had his beginnings with the death of his father, the second-in-command officer of the Jantine patricians. Death in battle is not the worst death in Warhammer, you might say, and you would be right. Yet it likely offered no solace to a sullen 12-year-old new to the Schola Progenium. Diligent and devout, he mastered the science of inspiration and the craft of fear, the principal tools in the hands of any commissar. Many years later, Gaunt would learn that his parent was betrayed by his own brother, General Aldo Dercius. Aldo left his relative to be torn apart by orcs to save his own skin. Dercius was also the benefactor who ensured his nephew's education in the Schola Progenium, which, as it turned out, saved him from retribution. The first significant act that young Ibram carried out as a full-fledged commissar was the execution of his own uncle, a traitor and a coward. This is the first pillar of heroism. Whatever you do, see it through to the end, and let everything else go to hell. But every destiny, like a coin, always has two sides. And the beacon that illuminated the soul of Ibram Gaunt was his mentor, the high-ranking commissar Delane Octar. He upheld the morale of the Hyrcan regiments of the Astra Militarum and turned them into an elite fighting unit of the Imperium. We are primarily interested in his philosophy and professional creed, for they became the internal core upon which Cadet Gaunt became who he was destined to be in the future. Let us give the floor to the old commissar. He spoke thus: "Learn to lie, trust no one, don't get involved in local politics, lead by example for your people, do not expect them to do what you can do, and most importantly, strive to ensure that the killer that exists within everyone acts for the greater good, for the Emperor and for all humanity. Because war in itself is abhorrent and thoughtless, quite peculiar thoughts for a political officer, are they not? Yet in some aspects, this life stance resonates with the thoughts of another famous commissar, Cain, at least during those moments when he was not overly concerned with saving his own precious life. Unfortunately, the death of Delane Octar turned out to be highly ludicrous and even incredible. Having driven the green skins off the planet, Gilatus Decimus, the defenders of the Imperium decided to celebrate. But as the war boss of the Orcs retreated, he behaved extremely unusually. He ordered the wine reserves to be poisoned. Octar, after drinking the poison, battled death for many long hours. He did not succeed, but his final act was the consecration of Ibram Gaunt as a full-fledged commissar. Later, our hero would name his mentor as one of the three people who had the greatest influence on his life. Well, a worthy epitaph in memory of a worthy man. And now it is time for us to move on. You have undoubtedly noticed that today's topic mentions a planet named Tanith. However, before that fateful journey, Ibram Gaunt had already seen plenty of warfare. He was attached to the 8th Hyrcan Regiment. In no small part, thanks to the influence of the late Octar, the tactics of this unit were quite inventive and even sensible. The Hyrcans often utilized artillery raids, avoided frontal assaults, and generally deemed it necessary to adapt the manner of combat to each specific enemy. Therefore, among the Hyrcans, the role of individual, well-trained veteran soldiers was of great significance. Gaunt would adopt this approach, seeing in his guardsmen not a faceless wave of cannon fodder driven to feats, but military specialists tailored for specific tasks. Gaunt had established himself as a highly valuable political officer even before his deployment to Tanith, which defined his entire subsequent fate. The warrior Slado himself, the leader of the Sabbat Crusade, personally included Ibram Gaunt in the guest list of a closed banquet. Between us, Slado, being a gifted military leader, was too fixated on the past, particularly on the achievements of the previous conquerors of this region, Sansabat and her generals. He desperately wanted to conduct the campaign according to the templates of 5 millennia ago, which introduced an element of predictability into his strategy. However, it was Sladeau on their deathbed who elevated Ibram Gaunt to the exceedingly rare rank of Commissar Colonel, thus placing an entire regiment under his command. Moreover, the dying War Master granted Gaunt and his men the so-called right of settlement, thereby allowing them to remain on the first of the liberated planets. Thus, guided by Sladeau's final wishes, Gaunt headed to Tanith to oversee 3 of the regiments there. But, as is known, if you wish to make the Emperor laugh, tell him your plans. Life and the archenemy's minions made their own amendments to this remarkable plan, and my heart beats dimly, sold into slavery to her from birth. I dare not even name her the fierce name of the motherland. From the Tales of the Old Earth. At first, Tanith did not particularly impress Ibram Gaunt. A crowd of gaunt, unkempt forest dwellers and nothing more. But the decrees of the Golden Throne are not debated, they are obeyed. Oh yes, there is a chapter of Lamenters. Have you heard of them? Apparently the cruel galaxy simply loves to mock certain people. And here we approach the second component of heroism, suffering. The night of the founding of the Tanith regiments turned out to be fiery, so fiery that the entire planet was engulfed in flames. The Chaos forces, which had long rampaged through the Sabbat worlds, slipped through the Imperial fleet's defences and descended upon the doomed world. Instead of taking command of the guardsmen entrusted to him, Commissar Gaunt faced a difficult choice. His men could either lay down their lives in a hopeless defence of their homeland or escape to serve the Emperor elsewhere. Ibram Gaunt chose the lesser evil. He ordered them to evacuate, to watch as their forests, cities and compatriots burned alive under the merciless strikes of the heretics. As you can see, this turned out to be the lesser evil only for the Commissar himself. As a result, he was left with a single regiment, whose soldiers hated and despised their commander for not letting them die in battle. The Tanith Regiment, the first and only one in the entire galaxy destined to become Gaunt's ghosts. The list of their campaigns and achievements is extensive, but we would rather not turn this narrative into a military history textbook. Instead, I will tell you about the people who forged these victories with their blood and sweat. After all, heroism is the highest strength of the human spirit against impossible circumstances. It is a mosaic of life, relationships, pain, actions, mistakes, and courage. It is the ability to live in such a way that the Almighty Emperor is proud of you. And sometimes it is mercy to the lost, like the soldiers named Colum Corbec and Elim Rawn. These soldiers, lost in their fury and grief, came to Gaunt demanding answers and explanations. Instead of immediate execution, they received the ranks of colonel and major. However, Rawn's disdain for their commander did not subside. When Corbec utilized his authority to quell protests and prevent Gaunt from conducting mass executions, Rawn was completely out of control. It even reached a point where Elim attempted to kill the Commissar he despised on the planet Blackshard. What did he receive in return? Ibram Gaunt personally carried the wounded Major Rawn out of the enemy citadel. Ironically, Blackshard became the site of the Tanith Regiment's baptism of fire, the place where Gaunt's ghosts were born. After 100 guardsmen secretly advanced into the heretic stronghold and delivered a decisive blow to their sanctuary, the Commissar realized that fate had truly smiled upon him. For it had provided him not with a bunch of filthy, embittered incompetents, but with an effective instrument of war. One only needed to understand who was suited for what. Yet the spirit of soldierly rebellion lingered in the air. Major Rawn and his cronies' behavior exceeded all bounds of decency. They even intercepted Gaunt's letters to learn as much as possible about their commanding officer. It took many years for the stubborn soldier to reconcile his anger toward Ibram Gaunt. Twice during the regiment's long campaigns, he assumed command. From a potential mutineer, Elim Rawn eventually transformed into the second-ranking officer of the unit and was placed in charge of one of the companies. Thus we discover another facet of Gaunt's heroism, patience with the wayward. From the very first day of the regiment's founding, the galaxy generously sowed difficulties before them. Yet, even amidst eternal war, there are as many outright scoundrels as there are good people. Before us stands General Noches Sturm, a man not devoid of talents, but vile, envious and petty, a true careerist. Seeing a threat to his position in Gaunt, he hated the Commissar with the peculiar hatred only mediocrity can feel towards an outstanding individual. On the planet Voltimand, he ordered the Tanith Regiment to accomplish the impossible, breach the defences of an enemy city. The forest scouts from the Dead World accomplished what the elite units of the general himself could not. Enraged and despairing, the general ordered the scouts to be subjected to artillery bombardment, staging the incident as friendly fire. And when Gaunt, who inconveniently survived, came to demand answers for the death of his soldiers, Noche Sturm attempted to frame him and have him executed. But the world is not without its good people. The commander of the artillery battery, executor of the criminal order, refused to play to his superior's tune. The general's plan failed, and he was forced to leave empty-handed. That day, the Tanith Regiment gained yet another mortal enemy, one of very, very many. But the Emperor protects. Eventually, circumstances arose such that the Tanith Regiment was tasked with hunting down Noche Sturm like prey. Why? Untangle this thread yourself. I advise beginning with Dan Abnett's book, First and Only. Even a hero is but human, and to humans weaknesses are inherent. There was a time when the valiant Commissar wanted to abandon everything, send this damned job to the demons, along with those forest paupers with all their hatred and endless problems, and to get far away from sin to some position where there is only a desk and an endless heap of papers that do not want to shoot you in the back. Ibram Gaunt had such an opportunity, but he did not take it, and stubbornly continued what he considered his duty, to inspire soldiers by personal example and lead them. Sometimes your worst nightmare isn't the serpent-eyed Xenos, but an ally who turns out to be a pawn of an unknown puppeteer, hidden behind 3 veils of lies. One doesn't need to be an Alpha Legionnaire or a Demon of Tzeentch to conduct such treacheries. Ordinary people can become choice bastards too. Such was the case with the former apprentice of the famous Inquisitor, Commodus Voke, a man named Golesh Heldane, and thanks to him in part, the campaigns on Fortis Binary and Menazoid Epsilon turned out to be worse than any abyss for the Tanith Regiment. Imagine an enormous battlefield, 400 kilometers of chemical-laden muck and ruins of manufactorums, a web of countless trenches, pillboxes and bunkers. Such was the world of the Forge Fortis Binary during the Sabbat Crusade. And where is the Tanith Regiment in this kill zone? Naturally, on the front lines. Gaunt's people were ordered to launch a hopeless assault on the heretics. Who sanctioned this wonderful strategy? Lord Militant Hector Dravere, envious and severe. But who whispered this brilliant idea into his ear? Someone named Draco Flentz, a colonel of the Jantine patricians, who has one exceptionally compelling reason to see Gaunt dead and preferably gutted alive. What do these distinguished gentlemen share besides their hatred for the leader of the Tanith Regiment? That they are both obedient puppets pulled by strings stretching from pitch darkness, but not so fast. An elite squad of Tanith scouts demolished a chaos shrine in one blow intended to turn the advancing Imperials into demon hosts. Yet the scouts themselves were dwindling in number. It's difficult, you see, to request reinforcements from home when that very home no longer exists. After the liberation of the Forge World Fortis Binary, no more than 1,500 guardsmen remained in service. However, the real storm broke on Menazoid Epsilon. What awaited Gaunt on this planet should not fall to the lot of any ordinary man. Political games of such a level are more suited for some Adeptus Astartes Magister, a Grand Master of Assassins, or at least a planetary governor. But by that time, War Master Slado had been in his grave for 8 months. The reins of leadership were being pulled by his successor, the illustrious Makaroth, and shadowy figures of all kinds and sorts. For they decided it was the right moment for betrayal, and so, Menazoid Epsilon. Before the commencement of this campaign, Gaunt's, metaphorically speaking, right hand, Major Rawn, is abducted. Upon their landing, the Tanith Regiment is struck from behind by the Jantine patricians, intent on annihilating their adversaries to the last man. Battling against both supposed allies and obvious enemies, Gaunt's ghosts doggedly hold their ground to the end. Ultimately, they manage to reveal the entire festering abscess of treachery. The fallen Inquisitor Heldane discovered something that could plunge the entire Imperium into the abyss of civil war. He had found the Dark Grail, a philosopher's stone of technology and an elixir of immortality in one. This radical found an STC constructor capable of producing Iron Men, the very robotic servants whose uprising had turned the galactic empire of humanity into a cluster of rapidly degenerating colonies. Were the Adeptus Mechanicus to learn of such discoveries, they would scour half the galaxy in their quest to acquire it, even though the STC from Menazoid Epsilon had been hopelessly tainted. Perhaps problems of such magnitude should be resolved by personalities like Malkador, the Sigillite, or Robut Gilliman. Yet for the ordinary man, there is one simple and iron rule that can save trillions of lives. If something appears as taint and acts as taint, then it is indeed taint, and the blight must be purged with cleansing fire. Haldane had plotted to use a private army of Iron Men to overthrow Makaroth and seize as much power as possible. Well, justice befell him and his puppets. Neither the Inquisitor, nor General Drever, nor Colonel Flense, nor the Jantine patricians, much less the infernal machine from the past, survived the noble wrath of Ibram Gaunt and his ghosts. I value life, and thus I fight to protect it. I mourn every person I lose and every sacrifice I make. One life or a million, it is all life. Colonel Commissar Ibram Gaunt. People are merely people. They serve, but they are mortal. On the planet Balhaut, Warmaster Slado paid the ultimate price to destroy Archon Nadzibar, who was nearly the first heretic to swear allegiance to the forces of darkness. He vanquished the monster in a duel, but he himself found eternal rest. As we have already mentioned, Warmaster Makaroth succeeded him. The Tanith, first and only, also fought on Balhaut, sharing fully in the joy of victory and the bitterness of loss, and also the disappointment. For chaos is multifaceted, and the fact that Nadzibar fell meant absolutely nothing. His magisters were all strong leaders and skilled commanders. They dispersed across the worlds of Sabbat, preparing for a rematch. One of them, Heritor Asphodel, fled to the hive world known as Vergast and entrenched in the Phaerozoica hive. Typically, in such cases, it is customary to say that nothing foretold disaster. On Vergast, everything heralded disaster. It was a true tangle of human folly, an army, generals too proud to acknowledge their own weakness, an enemy assault easily mistaken for another trade skirmish between cities, and distrust of the guardsmen who came to their aid. Asphodel employed his skill in hypnosis. And so, the 13 million-strong population of Phaerozoica obeyed his call. Yet even when shells covered the hives of Vervenhive, the settlement's rulers were so entangled in politics that it took them several hours to activate the city's defences. What followed was a month, 29 damnable days of enemy artillery bombardment. And it was the same in all matters. A major who stopped communicating, broken by pleas for help, a general who fled the battlefield, an army paralysed by leadership incompetence. All of this led to Ibram Gaunt taking command of the defence, who miraculously found himself in this chaos. Amazingly, while his fellow guardsmen used tactics befitting clinical idiots and ingratiated themselves with the planetary leadership, Gaunt worked. He and his allies repelled 3 skillfully organised assaults on Vervenhive, for Asphodel was anything but a fool. The forces of the arch-enemy found a weak point in the Hive's defence and obliterated it. The top of the Imperial command was scattered, and the entire weight of hopeless battle was shouldered by Commissar Ibram Gaunt. He personally led a commando raid on the foe's citadel to tear out the heart of the Chaos Acolyte. The Commissar succeeded. He struck down Asphodel with the sword of the legendary hero Hieronymus Sandar, yet he narrowly avoided death himself once again. Truly, some people are marked by the Emperor's favour. The sacrifices made by Ibram Gaunt's skills duly saved the Tanith regiment. Makaroth, impressed by the defenders' deeds and sorrow, granted them an act of consolation, the right to enlist as volunteers in the Astra Militarum. Is it any wonder which regiment the grateful inhabitants of Vergast rushed to join? Indeed, they became a bastion of alien and unfamiliar culture within the Tanith. Incidents occurred, yet both groups of guardsmen were united by the loss of their home and a desire for vengeance. This is but a fraction of the exploits of the first and only. The Tanith regiment has seen things we simply wouldn't believe. an Eldari fighting shoulder to shoulder with enchanted soldiers of the Imperium, an inquisitor forsaking his duty for the sake of pointy-eared Xenos, Saint Sabbat risen from the dead to once more lead the servants of the Golden Throne against the taint of chaos, a deployment to a chaos-captured world and a guerrilla war on a planetary scale, defending the ancient fortress from an entire blood-packed army of traitors, exterminating Chaos Magisters on an industrial scale. And finally, the numerous deaths and rebirths of the Tanith First and Only, now officially named the 81st as well as the 1st Reconnaissance Regiment. Yes, the losses were so great that Gaunt's people were once again merged with another unit, this time with the remnants of the 81st Belladon Regiment. Now under the command of the heroic Commissar, serve people from not 2, but now 3 worlds, each distinct from the other. Our hero is a capable and fortunate individual who lives and dreams of clamping the jaws around the enemy's throat. It would be desirable for even the Emperor to slightly smile and whisper, "Well done." In such a case, the Tanith Regiment, even without Ibram Gaunt, is simply brimming with heroes, and it would be criminal not to mention some of them. In the wild chill, in the shattered gloom, we stand on the land flying somewhere, philosopher, soldier, and cripple, from the tales of the old Earth. Thus, in the Tanith First and Only, at least 3 of the galaxy's coolest guardsmen serve, not counting Sly Marbo, of course. One can argue or agree with this, or one can sit by the campfire, toss a bundle of lasgun batteries next to it for recharging, and listen to the frontline tales of the exploits of people who have long since had nothing to lose. Let's start with Hlain Larkin, nicknamed the Madman. Seriously, who doesn't know him? Larkin, in fact, came up with calling the guys Gaunt's Ghosts. He is the regiment's senior sniper, not because he loves or knows how to give orders, but because he can, from an extraordinary distance, lodge a couple of shots into a heretic. They say that the optical sight helps him not only to knock off rowdy heads, but also to see the truth. Eldar seers who relied too much on their sorcery would not deny it, and once Larkin decided he had had enough of the guard and decided to desert. But after chatting with a statue and receiving a little gift from it, he changed his mind. That's why he's nicknamed Mad, but you simply won't find a better shooter in the entire Tanith Regiment. Next is Major Gol Collier. All the recruits from Vergast obey him. A simple worker, he managed to lead his comrades and fighters of the planetary defense forces when the time came. Moreover, they asked him to do so. The spirit of this soldier is so strong that he attacked a demon prince with a pickaxe. True, with the expected result. The foul demon literally shot half of his brain away, but Gol did not die. He was simply honourably stripped of his sergeant's stripes and demoted to a private. But once, an Imperial saint came across his path, and after a course of extraordinary therapy, Gol Collier was once again issuing orders, and soon rose to the rank of Major. Even though his brain did not grow back, and generally medical workers only throw up their hands, wondering how he survived at all. His fellow treatment companion, Saint Sabbat, Scout McVenna, consistently emerges victorious in battles with Chaos forces, from blood-packed traitors to warp demons. And at least a squad of these guys was killed in close combat by Private McVenna because, unfortunately, the lasgun ran out of power packs. Once, he went AWOL to keep in fear an army that managed to occupy an Imperial planet. Moreover, he trained the local resistance into a state of commandos. Probably they are still cutting down Chaos followers there. No wonder, given that he is a member of a secret order named the Nalshines. Moreover, he is the last bearer of their tradition and combat mastery, which means there will be many more enemy skulls at McVenna's count. The former commander of this glorious warrior, Sergeant Owen McCall, is also not lagging behind in feats. Among his achievements, among other things, are 2 Chaos Lords and a Dreadnought. Owen McCall is so adept at moving stealthily that he once won a training match against 3 Space Marines. He escaped captivity, infiltrated an enemy commander's headquarters and killed him. And as if these are some trifles, he later fought in a duel with a Mandrake Drukhari. For reference, a Mandrake is a living shadow that moves freely between the material universe and a parallel dimension. Plus, this creature is as fast as all Eldar, and its approach cannot be predicted or prevented. Old Owen McCall not only managed to accomplish this, but also blew the mandrake's brains out, first complimenting him on his competence. But really, is this worthy of a medal? Nevertheless, Gaunt would be remiss if he didn't one-up his subordinates here. Tanith Regiment, do you want to live forever? Colonel Commissar Ibram Gaunt. Although we know what miserable people Commissars can be, but Ibram Gaunt never executed his soldiers for anything less than treason. However, on occasion, the Colonel Commissar did execute other soldiers, for example, for stealing medicines. Our brave political officer also personally carried the wounded from the battlefield, and one could lose count of the lives he saved in this manner. Moreover, Gaunt did not shy away from rescuing people who, due to their own misunderstandings, desired his death at that very moment. This is, to put it mildly, an atypical entry in a commissar's resume. Like his men, Gaunt never parts with the chameleonic cloak, the hallmark of the Tanith Regiment. Tanith was a planet covered with forests that moved, and its inhabitants mastered the art of camouflage, ambush, and surprise assault to perfection. Gaunt embraced the cultural peculiarities of his regiment and mastered their combat methods. He repeatedly passed his lethally dangerous exams, personally led saboteur teams against strongholds and war machines where enemies were everywhere. Gaunt personally killed a Chaos Space Marine in close combat. This deed alone is enough to rank him among the greatest commissars of the Imperium, alongside Cain and Sebastian Yarrick. Ibram Gaunt and his chosen squad spent considerable time on a Chaos-occupied planet, and thereafter were lost in the warp. Most other regiments, after such adventures, would simply be teeming with the corruption of the Dark Gods and various mutations. But the Tanith Regiment is the first and only one in which even supernatural entities do not linger. Not to mention, the Commissars' detachment previously had the greatest honour of guarding the Sant Sabbat, in whose name the entire crusade was undertaken. And if even this doesn't convince you, look at this man's service record. He dealt with 4 inquisitors, and every time, the conflicts and hostility were resolved in his favour. He endured unbearable torture and was considered dead, but was then rescued by the Tanith Regiment and received bionic eyes in place of those ripped out by his captors. Ibram Gaunt journeyed from being an orphan of the Schola Progenium to becoming a Lord Militant, and then the First Lord Executor, right hand of Makaroth. And when he learned he was being marked for the position of War Master, he went to him and revealed everything, then made every effort to deal with the conspirators. Honest, loyal with iron principles, yet not devoid of mercy. This is Ibram Gaunt, and let us be honest, the First Tanith Regiment deserves nothing less. Even though the archives of the Sabbat Crusade have not yet been fully disclosed, one thing is beyond doubt. His fellow commissars will invariably be at the forefront, because they are the embodiment of the true heroism we sought. The dossier number containing information about issued in the combat zone. The following document must be disseminated among all ranks. Gaining an understanding of the following statements, issued by Divisio Mortis and Officio Prefectus, is mandatory. Your commissar will soon distribute an expanded, approved version for senior officers. Know that the bell of lost souls has tolled in this chronosegment, for the loss of a great hero of the Astra Militarum is a loss for all of humanity. Know that the God Emperor, in his boundless wisdom, has decreed that his faithful servant lay down his physical arms, for such worldly duties are no longer his to bear. He will now be given a new task, and the fire in his soul burns like the sun. The God Emperor has commanded that Sebastian Yarrick join the Great War, for he is now ready. Respectfully, Gravitus Maximus, Ministrorum Sabamenda. The name of the deceased, Sebastian Yarrick. Position, Commissar Officio Prefectus. Title, Hero of Hive Hades. Place of death, cause of death. Primarily renowned for his involvement in the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon in the last century of the 41st millennium, where he fought against the Orc warlord Gahajkul Mag Uruk Thraka. Early years. Born on Taus III under the name of Sebastian Varden, the young Yarrick was orphaned when he was 7 standard years old. Raised by his maternal grandfather in a small community near New Cadon Hive, he spent the next 3 years under the loving but harsh tutelage of this old Astra Militarum veteran sergeant, learning how to fight, lay traps, and stay hidden. When the orcs invaded his homeworld, young Yarrick survived alone, hiding from the greenskins, laying traps, killing Gretchen, foraging, and generally doing everything he could to survive using all the tactics and tricks that his grandfather had taught him. After an Imperial relief, flotilla finally arrived in orbit over Taos. Several solar months later, Astra Militarum regiments were deployed. One squad on patrol picked up the lone 10-year-old boy, who there and then took the name of his grandfather, Yarrick, as his surname. Following this, he was taken by the Imperium Schola Progenium to be educated and indoctrinated like most Commissars. Before the start of the war for Armageddon, Yarrick was exiled to Hive Hades by Hermann von Straub, the infamously notorious planetary governor of Armageddon, after the Commissar ordered astropaths to send a request for aid to the Imperium. Curtis Mannheim, a princeps of Legio Metallica, later called Hermann von Straub, the greatest wastrel of flesh and bones born in 500 years. Under the inept governance, the planet was gradually being destroyed until the orcs reached Hive Hades. Here, Commissar Yarrick commanded the defending forces, inspiring them to fight with true obsessiveness. During the first assault, an orc war boss, one of the most distinguished underlings of Gaunt, directed most of his forces to Yarrick's positions, where he was able to personally engage in combat with the Honourable Commissar. The greenskin, using his power claw, was able to sever the Commissar's right arm at the elbow. Believing the human was finished, he let his guard down and, grappling with pain and shock like no other, Yarrick severed the head of the orc war boss with one swing. Witnesses claimed that Yarrick picked up the greenskin's power claw and, brandishing it, struck fear into the orcs and inspired the defenders of the Hive to fight the Xenos. Legend states that only after the assault on Hades was repelled did Yarrick allow himself the luxury of losing consciousness. The news of this incident spread among the orcs like wildfire, and wherever Yarrick fought, the green-skinned Xenos fled in terror. Yarrick fully utilized his fame, modifying Ugelhard's claw to fit him as a prosthetic. He also replaced his left eye with a laser bio-implant, playing on the orc's superstition, who believed he had an evil eye, or as they called it, the evil eye that kills with a glance. For 6 months after the first assault, the defenders of Hive Hades repelled all subsequent attacks. Although memories of the siege vary, it was unanimously considered that it was Yarrick who made it possible. He was the one who unified the defenders, the one who brought them back from the brink of defeat, the one whose faith gave them the strength to carry on. The Imperial defense was so fierce that Orc leader Gaunt personally joined the battle with his vanguard troops. He attempted to ravage the Hive using every strategy known to him, but the defense forces under Yarrick's command withstood them all. In the end, the Hive became the battlefield for 2 commanders. When all the forces of Gaunt descended upon Hades, Yarrick realized that the Imperial defenders could no longer hold their positions. Through a series of daring guerrilla raids, the remnants of the defense forces managed to escape the encirclement of the greenskins. During the retreat, the Commissar was seriously wounded, but his iron will helped him survive. Eventually, the war concluded with the arrival of the Space Marines of the Blood Angels chapter under the command of Commander Dante, who took control of the remaining defenders of Armageddon. Yarrick accepted nominal retirement along with a training post on Armageddon. However, the realization that such an orc as Gaunt still lived was an overwhelming distraction. Half a year later, Yarrick returned to duty, swearing that he would not rest until Gaunt Mag Uruk Thraka was found and slain. Yarrick pursued his vow for nearly 10 standard years, chasing his arch-nemesis. Gaunt retreated from Yarrick, safeguarding what remained of his forces, and engaged in rearguard battles only as necessary. Yarrick attempted to break the stalemate by forcing the Orc to land on Golgotha, once an Imperial planet. The Commissars' plans were disrupted by a massive space hulk that emerged from behind Golgotha's moon, driving the Imperial fleet away from the planet. During this time, Gaunt and the remnants of his army launched a furious assault on the defenders of the Imperium, and even the Commissar could not oppose it. Despite fierce defense and incredible feats, the humans were annihilated, and Yarrick was captured by Gaunt. Awakening aboard the Orc's space hulk, Yarrick found himself deprived of his bionic claw and baleful eye, hanging in chains above a vast pit. Gaunt, observing the events, waited for the Commissar to fully regain consciousness, and sent him down a metal chute amidst the laughter of the watching Orcs. Landing amidst piles of refuse, Yarrick was forced to defend himself against a pack of squigs scavenging through the waste. Unyielding to fear, Yarrick systematically hunted the squigs, using their massive spikes to create an improvised ladder and climb back up to the refuse chute. When several days later he succeeded in doing so, Yarrick was surprised to find that Gaunt had been waiting for him all along, as if the war boss had known from the start that the human would escape the trap. Gaunt then ordered the Commissar to be thrown among the other human prisoners held on the space hulk. Quickly assessing his situation, Yarrick set about organizing an uprising among the human slaves. As human work crews were used by the Orcs in a disorganized manner as a labor force, they managed to create an almost complete crude map of the space hulk during their work. Yarrick wanted to organize an attack on a structure shaped like a large Orc head, believing it to be a temple of Orc gods, and that Gaunt would be there. However, other slaves persuaded him to try to escape instead and warn the Imperium. Yarrick reluctantly agreed. When the time came, one of the work teams caused a diversion at a large ammunition depot, and Yarrick and a dozen others managed to escape in the chaos. Alas, the escape was impossible, as the ship they planned to flee with was in the process of being repaired by Orc mech boys on the space hulk. Upon learning this, the pilot of the group launched the repaired ship anyway, which immediately exploded, providing Yarrick with yet another distraction. With no other choice, the remaining humans headed to the Hulk's temple, which was in fact a command post. The people sacrificed themselves to give Yarrick a chance to reach the top and face his arch-nemesis. However, when Yarrick reached the bridge, he found only a few mech boys, whom he quickly dispatched. As the Orcs pursued Yarrick, he resolved on his final daring maneuver by activating all the Space Hulk's systems in the hope that it would tear itself apart from the strain of uncoordinated forces. Peering out from the bridge's eyes, Yarrick saw a series of explosions causing massive damage and entrusted his soul to the Emperor as they rushed towards him. Several days later, Yarrick regained consciousness. Astonished to find himself still alive, he was even more amazed that his bionic enhancements had been returned to him while he was unconscious. Exiting the room, he discovered hundreds of Orcs greeting him, clearing a path through their ranks. Confused, the Commissar followed his escort to the nearest launch bay, where Gaunt awaited him in front of an undamaged shuttle. Yarrick expected to be forced into a fight, yet Gaunt merely stepped aside, stating to Yarrick that it was a good fight. And now he must return to Armageddon and wait for the Orcs' return, for another war for the planet would soon begin. Taking a step that surprised both friend and foe, Gaunt later told his astonished subordinates that good enemies are hard to find, implying that he enjoyed the challenge posed by the humans so much that he did not want it to end so quickly. Yarrick departed the Orc hulk on the shuttle provided by his enemy, but soon returned with new forces recruited from the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus and massive weaponry known as the Ordinatus Golgotha, driving the Orcs from the planet. Gaunt escaped once more, and Golgotha was reclaimed by the Orcs shortly before the Third War for Armageddon. 50 Terran years after the end of the Second War for Armageddon, Gaunt made a second attempt to seize the Hive World from the Imperium. The Third War proved to be much more arduous for Commissar Yarrick. Yarrick arrived on the planet 2 weeks before the invasion commenced. He agreed to assume full command over all the forces on the planet, and his first order was to launch all remaining aircraft into the air to destroy as many Orcs as possible before they even touched ground. Eventually, the Orcs landed their rocks, providing them with pre-built fortresses made from hollowed-out asteroids. Yarrick personally led the assault on one of these fortresses alongside a squad of Cadian soldiers. The subsequent catastrophic, unremitting war pushed the military potential of the Adeptus Ministorum almost to its limit. However, despite all the ferocity and ingenuity of the Orc warlord, Armageddon did not fall. Imperial forces mounted a worthy resistance against the invaders, and the planet turned into a brutal and unending war zone. In the end, the Orcs were driven out of the Armageddon system, and in pursuit of Gazkul, the Black Templars gave chase. Yarrick personally requested High Marshal Helbrecht for permission to join the pursuers, and when Helbrecht consented, the Commissar promptly set out. Without the tireless efforts of Commissar Yarrick, the Orcs would have long ago conquered Armageddon and surged towards Holy Terror. Yarrick wore the typical uniform of an Imperial Commissar, including a dark greatcoat and a peaked cap. The Honorary Commissar also wore power armor with a small nuclear reactor, which powered many other items of Yarrick's equipment. Chief among them, like a signature emblem, was a power claw, which the Commissar took from the corpse of Ugelhard during the Second War for Armageddon. Despite its typical crude Orc appearance, the weapon was restored and blessed by both the priests of the Adeptus Ministorum and the Adeptus Mechanicus. Yarrick's armor also features an integrated protective field that deflects almost all attacks. A bionic eye, implanted in Yarrick to play upon the Orcs' superstitious fear, the so-called Evil Eye, can emit a laser beam at the Commissar's mental command. The beam is powerful enough to pierce an enemy's skull from 10 paces. So Yarrick has rightfully earned his reputation. When not moving on foot, Yarrick could rely on his personal Baneblade super-heavy tank, the Fortress of Arrogance, which serves as an immobile command centre and motivational platform. Blessed by the priests of the Ministorum and Mechanicus, the Baneblade was specially modified to allow the Commissar to motivate his troops from atop the main turret, while remaining shielded within a well-protected power field. The Fortress of Arrogance is as well known as its passenger, and many believe that the tank was blessed by the Emperor, just like Yarrick himself. However, Sebastian Yarrick's most potent weapon was not mechanical devices or mighty vehicles, but his own iron will, which allowed him to disregard wounds that would incapacitate most other beings. This unyielding determination to fight and win for humanity, combined with charisma and oratory prowess, made him one of the most renowned and revered leaders of the Imperial Guard. Imperial soldiers considered it a tremendous honor to serve under the venerable Commissar, not to mention that Yarrick never had to execute officers under his command. Such was the strength of his motivation. Rumors suggest that even Space Marine commanders obeyed his authority, though these might be mere tales spread by the rank and file to boost morale. The names of the heroes of the Imperium will never be forgotten, but one name will be remembered forever, not only by the glorious defenders of the Imperium, but also by the wildest enemies of humanity. Great glory to you, Sebastian Yarrick. Perhaps every Warhammer enthusiast knows that this universe is built on an impressive scale. Gods and demons devour each other. Interstellar fleets burn like candles in the indifferent void. Millions of dead are nothing more than daily statistics, and planets are mere bargaining chips on the political map. It goes without saying that such a large and intriguing place cannot do without heroes, and heroes, they come in different forms. St. Celestine, soaring on snow-white wings over the battlefield. Ursarkar Creed, stuck in Trazin's closet like a fly in amber. The nameless guardsman who lived his average 15 hours and died in a bayonet charge. And, of course, the ordinary regimental commissar, whose task is to maintain the necessary level of courage no matter what. But this issue is about a commissar who is not quite ordinary. Who is he, one might ask, an interested neophyte, Shafus Cain in the flesh? A kind word works wonders, but a kind word from an executioner works even greater ones. Inquisitor Maiden. Let's ponder what constitutes a soldier's heroism in a world of eternal war. Devotion to the Emperor, undoubtedly. The grim resignation of a doomed man. As much as you want, and also faith, hope, fear of punishment, mortal terror and tense calm, richly mixed with the minutiae of army life. And if someone can awaken all these feelings in others, if they can play on the strings of human souls, then for their comrades in misfortune, they become a great person. Such was Shafus Cain, a hero of the Imperium. Even generals did not hesitate to seek his advice. Guardsmen were ready to lay down their lives for him, which, to put it mildly, is unusual. Cain was able to find common ground even with Xenos without regrettable consequences for himself. The secret of his success is simple. Firstly, in any situation, Cain was notably logical and tried not to go overboard with matters of discipline. Secondly, the Emperor generously endowed him with various talents, many of which were exceptionally useful in war. Cain combined composure, intuition, and the ability to present himself in the best light, which nonetheless did not prevent him from being a pathologically fortunate coward. Kaifos was honestly aware of his shortcomings, and his charisma was so great that Cain managed to endear himself even to some inquisitors, at least one of them for sure. When a woman wishes to speak about us, the one thing you can be sure of is that no combat experience will help you survive. Kaifos Cain. As befits a hero of galactic scale, Cain has a published biography titled For the Emperor, The Life of a Commissar. But like other lives of the Empire's ascetics, it is no more than a sanitized and official collection of ideologically approved feats. To get to know Cain better, one must turn to other sources. Taking a break from military affairs in his position as a teacher at Schola Progenium, the retired commissar took it upon himself to write something akin to memoirs. And here again, one can marvel at the incredible style of this man's personality. The fact is, his recordings are piercingly honest. Cain, with a light heart, ensured himself not just one execution-worthy article, confessing to cowardice, deception of authorities, manipulation, collaboration with Xenos, and other serious crimes. Even more surprising is the personality of the editor of his memoirs, for the task was undertaken not by a scribe dried up by library dust, but by an inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos named Amberley Vale. After her first meeting with the glorious Commissar, Amberley, despite professional mistrust, quickly fell under his charm. Energetic, intelligent, and endowed with a sense of humour, Vale not only did not pass a death sentence on Cain for numerous sins, but rather she became his employer, friend, and even lover. This, however, would not have stopped Inquisitor Vale from executing anyone who violated an order or secrecy regime. However, Cain was not lacking in prudence, and therefore she not only provided him with deadly assignments, but also took it upon herself to edit the Commissars' records. Constructed in chronological order and supplemented with witty comments by Amberley Vale, this massive confession, or should I say personal file, acquired the name Cain Archive. Naturally, Inquisitor Vale immediately classified the Commissar's revelation to not unsettle unprepared minds and to protect her friend from the unfortunate fate of a heretic. And soon after, with a light touch from Miss Vale, the archive even gained quite significant popularity among her Inquisitor colleagues. But the accounts of the brave Commissar's adventures would be incomplete without a third source. The works of Genit Sulla, once a junior officer under Cain's supervision and later Lady General of the Imperial Guard. The memoirs of Sulla are replete with feats, glorious achievements, and heroic deeds. They lack only one element, the talent for writing, which makes them nearly unreadable, as editor Vale regularly notes. In all other respects, the sources of Kaifos Cain's biography are unanimous. The Commissar was an outstanding individual. In a couple of decades, he managed to accomplish more than some imperial saint or vile traitor. It all depends on your point of view, and I leave that choice to you. Life is much easier when there is someone to blame. Gilbran Quayle, Collected Works. The Imperium is cruel because it is part of a no less cruel universe. A show execution here is not only the highest measure of punishment, but also a routine way to make a soldier carry out the sacred will of command. An Imperial Commissar is an officer of the Officio Prefectus, tasked with boosting morale by any means available to him. However, a lofty rank is not a guarantee of impunity, and any Lord Commander may one day feel the weight of a Commissar's bolt pistol at the back of his head. Incidentally, Cain preferred a much lighter las pistol. A Commissar is the embodiment of ultimate justice. Judge, jury, and executioner, the last barrier against cowardice, heresy, and betrayal within his entrusted unit. Commissars exist everywhere, from the guard to the fleet. Speaking of Commissars, unlike many colleagues in his profession, Kaifos Cain always prioritized his own survival. But, as they say, if you want to make the Emperor laugh, tell him about your plans. The cruel galaxy constantly tried to kill the Commissar, demonstrating creativity and a perverse sense of humour. The more the Commissar tried to avoid the front lines, the more troubles fell upon his head. But Cain quickly learned how to exploit the blind spots of Imperial ideology and his own talents to his advantage. He excelled at attracting the right people and leveraging their strengths. If avoiding a skirmish heroically wasn't possible, he fought like a demon from the depths of the warp. It is worth emphasizing that Cain's adversaries included almost every hostile race and faction against humanity, from Tyrannids to Necrons, as well as representatives of his own kind. The Commissar had to battle opponents capable of easily destroying a space marine from the First Company. At various times, Cain overcame such foes as an Orc warboss, Ginstealers, Chaos Astartes, a Corporaptor Primus, a Hive Tyrant, and even a Demonette of Slanesh. Cain once entertained himself by dueling with a Tech Marine. In light of such a record, even the good name of Sly Marbo dims slightly. Additionally, Commissar Cain honed his skills in diplomacy, law, and public relations. He outwitted a Chaos warlord, negotiated with the Tau, saved his men from execution, rallied the populace to fight, and befriended the Inquisition. And this is not to mention a small religious cult named after his beloved self. The episodic execution of utterly hopeless characters only reinforced his heroic image. As for everyday convenience, Cain was always cared for by his unchanging aide, Ferric Jurgen. Jurgen is an exceptionally unique guardsman, sloppy, not very intelligent, as stubborn as a grox, and possessing such a pungent bodily aroma that it was even compared to a walking biological weapon. Long ago, Ferric was assigned to Cain as an aide, as a veiled mockery of the Commissariat. But the Commissar quickly found many incontrovertible virtues in his aide. Jurgen had an almost mystical ability to procure anything his master might need: tea, accommodation, an armoured transport, and other benefits. With Jurgen as an adjutant, one could fend off any supplicant, no matter how persistent. Jurgen was well versed in orcs and exhibited remarkable composure in battle. He was very skilled at driving vehicles, shot as accurately as a sniper, and was sufficiently dull-witted not to realize that his commander was an unabashed coward. As a pleasant detail, Ferric Jurgen was a pariah, which meant he nullified the manifestations of the warp within a certain radius around him. Overall, this laconic and foul-smelling fighter was probably the best aide in the entire Imperium. It is to him that Cain owes his long and relatively prosperous life. Cain's life can be divided into three major phases. The first was service in the Valhallan 12th Field Artillery. The second phase begins after being transferred to the 597th Valhallan, and the third is Cain's work as an instructor at Schola Progenium. But each of these periods is rich in adventures. At any age, the famous Commissar destroyed the Emperor's enemies and enhanced his already glorious reputation. Cain never changed, continually surmounting dangers while desperately trying to avoid them. However, let's proceed in order. I guess I am simply not cut out to deal with paperwork. Commissar Kaifos Cain. It all began on Desolatia 4. A young officer of the Officio Prefectus, assigned to a regiment of field artillery, landed on a mining colony. There he already displayed his characteristic traits, for example, the ability to blend in among the soldiers, a love for the salamander armoured vehicle, and heroic caution. Apparently the Master of Mankind was eager to execute his plan concerning the ingenious Commissar, as interesting adventures rained down on Cain's head one after another. After a victory over the Orcs, the Astra Militarum strike group found themselves amidst a Tyrannid invasion. Cain and his charges endured a rain of mycetic spores, came under attack by gargoyles, and then faced a simple choice: flee or die. The resourceful servants of the Golden Throne commandeered a light tank and then headed towards the nearest spaceport. On their path to salvation, they nearly fell into the claws of Gaunts and were almost consumed by a Hive Tyrant, which Cain managed to destroy by commanding a Hydra battery. He also managed to save Jurgen from certain death. The monsters have been vanquished. The army rejoices. On Slokenberg, the Commissars endured 8 months of idleness, 2 warring chaos cults, and their first encounter with a personal nightmare, the cultist Emily Dubois. Kaifos shot her, But as it turned out, it didn't help her settle down. Perhaps the Chaos Gods also took notice of the cowardly Commissar and decided to amuse themselves with him. All these hassles seemed a trifle compared to the turmoil on Purlia. Approaching this industrial world, the force of the Orc Psychers blew the Imperial fleet out of the warp, and the human ships immediately fell into an ambush. Cain and Jurgen landed on Purlia only to discover what lay on its eastern side, while the rest of the Astra Militarum forces were attempting to reclaim the western side. Hundreds of kilometers of terrain and tens of thousands of enraged orcs stood between Cain and his allies. Kaifos stumbled upon local guerrillas, and everything unfolded from there like a snowball rolling downhill. Travelling through mountains and desert, Cain and his company stumbled upon useful things, equipment and orcs. That time, Cain managed to blow something up now and again. If not an entire city, then at least an Adeptus Mechanicus dam. Incidentally, later a city with a modest name of Kaliningrad emerged at the site of the scorched settlement. Kaifos's exploits on Purlia concluded when he ran into an orc warboss and killed him with a shot to the eye. Thus, the brave Commissar marked his account with his first remarkable act of heroism. Then, likely seeking to diversify Cain's adventures, the Golden Throne assigned him to serve as a commissar at headquarters and sent him to a place known as Doomsday Prime. This planet had mysterious caves, Necron artifacts, cyborg killers, nothing short of a vacation. Lucky Commissar lost 2 fingers and a lot of blood that day, but he survived, the only one from his unit, and he was saved by Space Marines. Nothing extraordinary, right? Sometime later, Cain awoke in the Apothecarian of the Chapter Reclaimers. How many mortals do you think can boast of being patched up by an apothecary? Since the Commissar was originally ordered to perform the duties of a liaison with the chapter, he had no choice but to accompany the Astartes to quell a planetary uprising. And so Cain, along with Mira, the governor's daughter, was rummaging through the sewers, trying to reach the heretics' domain. The Commissar managed to mine the enemy's artillery, but the heretics raised the alarm, forcing Cain to flee. The sewers of the industrial world of Verdia turned out to be an intriguing place. Only after Cain and the governor's daughter managed to shake off the soldiers did they fall right into the embrace of the gin stealers, led naturally by a pure strain gin stealer. Heroics aside, in this venture the slightly battered Commissar outdid himself. He held off the monster, for whom a Terminator Marine was not considered a threatening adversary. By the way, it was the Terminators who saved the lost scouts from death or worse by shooting the Xenos. The heroic routines just wouldn't end. A sparring match with a Space Marine, a boarding skirmish with orcs, a love struggle with Mira, a diplomatic reception, the prospect of marriage, and the splendid idea of exploring a space hulk teeming with other such dangers. Cain and Jurgen got rid of the persistent lady with minimal fuss. They merely played hide-and-seek with the gin stealers for a while, served as targets for the orcs, and kept the Xenos busy with mutual butchery, thus preventing the infection of nearby planets. Kaifos, as always, managed to spin the situation in a way that earned him the respect of all high-ranking figures, from the Adeptus Astartes to the governor of Viridian. In the meantime, having destroyed an ancient temple of Nurgle, Cain and his aide went forward towards a bright future. The Commissar had a new assignment awaiting him, marking the second phase of his illustrious life. Let us temporarily set aside the ironic tone of our narrative, because by taking charge of 2 demoralized regiments of the Guard, Cain accomplished what could make him be called the greatest man of his time. The Commissar saved the rebellious guardsmen from a court-martial. This deserves respect, does it not? It is never too late to panic. Valhallan proverb. Here's the story. 2 contingents of the Valhallan Ice Warriors, the 296th and the 301st Regiments, suffered devastating losses, and the Departamento Munitorum deemed it necessary to merge them. However, the officials failed to take a couple of nuances into consideration. The battle-heated soldiers simply couldn't determine whose lasgun was longer. Firstly, one unit consisted of men, while the other was exclusively female. Secondly, a less experienced woman in military terms received the rank of colonel. She surpassed her colleague by virtue of being 3 days older. In such conditions, a mutiny among Cain's entrusted soldiers would only have been a matter of time, and it happened, and in quite a way. En route to their location, the guardsmen started butchering one another, and even killed a couple of military police officers on the ship. But our commissar came out unscathed yet again. Using loopholes in Imperial law and a good understanding of human psychology, the hero of the Imperium pulled the convicted mutinous soldiers from the noose. He formed a personal squad of death dealers from them. He devised and established the only possible framework in which the newly created 597th Regiment could exist normally. After this, Cain's other achievements in the Gravelax campaign, such as meeting a Kroot mercenary, evacuating a Tau diplomatic delegation, engaging in aggressive negotiations with the Fire Warriors, and saving the Inquisitor and her retinue, no longer seem so impressive. Acting decisively and daringly, the Commissar and his men fought their way through throngs of traitor guardsmen, Tau warriors and Djinn stealers to the secret puppet master of the catastrophe on Gravelax, the planetary governor, who turned out to be a Djinn stealer hybrid. At the cost of considerable losses, the Commissar's squad destroyed the aberration, and once again Kaifos Cain saved the world, this time from a war of extermination. The Tau deemed the game not worth the candle and withdrew from the planet. During the skirmish on Gravelax, the Commissar made acquaintances that would significantly determine his fate. Colonel Regina Castine, Major Ruput Brocklau, the first individuals of the 597th Valhallan, General Zivan, superior officer, Lieutenant Genit Sulla, an outstanding commander and a remarkably bad writer. And finally, Inquisitor Vale, friend, lover, and biographer of Cain, who preserved his true legacy for posterity. A year after the incident at Gravelax, the Valhallan 597th Regiment was sent to guard a promethium-enriching factory from marauding greenskins. For once, the natives from the ice-forged Valhalla found themselves in familiar natural conditions. Eternal frost was abundant on Simia Orichalcae. Orcs, too, were plentiful. It seemed a simple assignment: stand in a trench, shoot Xenos, die for the Emperor. In reality, things turned out to be significantly more complex. First, the ambuls. These giant beetle diggers burrow large tunnels, meaning it was only a matter of time before the orcs would find them and reach the factory bypassing Imperial positions. Second, the greenskins had a Gargant, a heavily armed monster the size of a Titan. Third, the ambuls had tunnelled to a dormant Necron tomb. It was discovered that the local tech priests had deliberately built the factory away from major mineral deposits, hoping to profit from xenotech. The situation was nearly hopeless. Orcs press forward, guardsmen perish, Necrons awaken, while the Magos rub their servo hands as Cain and his company hide from killer robots in their own tomb. To top it all, new mechanoids began arriving through a portal hidden within the planet's depths, while an orc space hulk loomed on its approach. Cain resolved the problem dramatically, flooding the tunnels and caverns with promethium, blowing up everything and escaping with everyone. The end. Sometimes it seems that the harsh galaxy intentionally shuffled bloodthirsty monsters destined to cross paths with Commissar Cain. The volcanic planet Periremunda presented the brave, or rather desperate, Commissar with another uprising. The 597th Regiment gathered to quell separatists, only to encounter a Djinn-stealer cult, a tyrannid vanguard and unauthorized psychers. Moreover, someone very persistent made desperate attempts to kill Cain, naturally leaving him in a state of some confusion. Acting hand-in-hand with Amberley Vale's team and fending off tyrannids, the Commissar discovered his enemy. Renegade Inquisitor Killian and his companion, Magos Meteus, decided that if they couldn't kill Cain, they might as well recruit the hero of the Imperium as an ally. In all seriousness, Killian revealed that he had been studying a warp artifact called the Shadowlight for many years. A single touch could turn some latent psychers into sorcerous death machines. The others indeed perished in terrible agony, but this was not deemed critical, for with the help of an army of psychers, the madman hoped to realize his grand plans to exterminate chaos worshippers, demons, heretics, xenos, and dark gods, all except the trustworthy humanity. Moreover, the psychopath kept a living tyrannid lictor alive to lure a hive fleet and destroy all evidence of his activities. However, things did not go as planned. Amberley Vale declared Killian a heretic, forcing him to flee. In fact, everyone had to flee because the Tyrannids took to the planet Periremunda in earnest. Praise be to the Golden Throne, for the Imperial fleet arrived in time and began the battle against the Tyrannids. The heretic is on the run, Shadowlight is with the Inquisition, all in all a glorious victory. Later, the Evil Horn deployed Cain and his regiment to the planet Adumbria, half of which is frozen in ice, while the other half is a blazing inferno. Somewhere between these hells lies a narrow strip of settlements and cities. The 597th Regiment hunts for lone heretics in the desert, while Cain and his companions tread over corpses in search of greater evil. And he who seeks shall always find. The Commissar encountered the following menaces: Slaanesh cultists attempting to summon demons, Cornate Marines eager to battle the Slaanesh cultists, and his old acquaintance Emily Dubois, whom Cain had executed long ago, albeit apparently not very effectively. This entire situation was further complicated by the fact that fellow Commissar Thomas Beje saw through Cain's very nature. But naturally, our favourite Commissar emerged unscathed once again. Emily Dubois was banished, the cult destroyed, and Beje disgracefully demoted. We also learned that Cain could fence on equal footing with a Chaos Space Marine. Following this brief adventure, the Commissars and his guards found themselves on the planet Nosquam. They flew with the intent to exterminate orcs, but an unstable Geller field made the situation far more interesting. A demon that breached the transport ship caused true havoc on board. And so, a routine flight to a routine battle ended with the regimental transport crash landing, specifically breaking through Nosquam's icy crust. The Imperials noted with surprise that the number of orcs at the front had somehow diminished. The reason proved to be even more incredible. Cain and his combat squad stumbled upon Tyrannids. Not just any Tyrannids, but monsters that had lain within the ice for at least 7,000 years. The mythical comet that once struck Nosquam was actually a hive ship. The heat from the crashing transport was sufficient to slowly thaw the ancient invaders. Space Marines volunteered to assist with the omnivorous bug problem, but Cain decided to blow everything up. Battling through the horde of Xenos, the soldiers disabled the geothermal station's safeguards. The explosion was so powerful that not only the ship but an entire city was vaporized, though it had been evacuated in advance. Only after this did the Space Marines deem it appropriate to appear. The Astartes lifted the Commissar to orbit, where he saw Amberley Vale's interstellar yacht, which presented our hero with his next top-secret mission. Concerning what occurred on the yacht afterward, we shall tactfully remain silent. On this heroic note concludes the last narrative of Cain's archive about service in the 597th Regiment. Whatever some individuals might believe, the universe certainly has a sense of humour. 60 years after the incident on Gravelax, Cain, now acting as a public relations officer at the headquarters of General Bradick, was once again compelled to negotiate with the Tau. Initially, everything unfolded like a commendable imperial textbook on xenophobia. On the planet Quadravidia, humans and Tau annihilated each other with whatever means available. Cain drank tea, and in the intervals between cups, he tried to survive under the enemy's plasma fire. However, the pilot of the next battlesuit, instead of shooting the Commissar, transmitted a request for a ceasefire, having cornered him. Humans and Tau ceased hostilities to repel the onslaught of a far more dreadful enemy, the Tyrannids. Just like half a century ago, except that the locals had brought the calamity upon themselves. Demonstrating astounding carelessness, the Magos of Quadravidia and the Chapter Reclaimers were breeding combat forms of the Tyrannids for study, creating hybrids, in essence doing everything to cultivate their very own toy cult of gin-stealers by their own hands. In the name of enlightenment and science, the researchers drew a biological catastrophe upon their world. They were unaware that they were being led by an infected Magos. It was Cain who became the link between all allies and determined the fate of the planet. However, after all, he is a hero of the Imperium, is he not? but every illustrious career must come to an end sooner or later. Life is a journey. The destination is lamentable. Argon Slater. Well, what did you expect? Act 2, Scene 2. In the year 993 of the 41st millennium, the cherished dream of Cain came true. He took up the position of a mentor at the Schola Progenium on Purlia, and now the universe somewhat relented in its attempts to kill him. Of course, the Inquisition occasionally entrusted the ex-Commissar with certain secret affairs, but hold on, it's Amberley Vale. She can be allowed this from time to time. Yet, as the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon drew nearer, the galaxy grew increasingly uneasy. The formidable Lord of Chaos simply could not ignore such a valuable device as the Shadowlight. It was found on Purlia and returned there, appearing as part of a much more powerful Xeno device discovered on the planet. A team of Inquisitors from the Ordo Xenos and Magos of Mechanicus continued to study the artifact. Soon, Cain's task became to protect them all. As towards Purlia hurried the warlord of Abaddon, Varan the Undefeatable, master of persuasion and hypnosis. The problem was that the defenders of Purlia were desperately short on forces. Planetary defense forces, volunteer militias, as well as veteran instructors from the Schola Progenium, that was all the defensive might there was. Cain, in his typical manner, initiated vigorous activities. He became part of an improvised headquarters with positions occupied by green Commissar cadets and seasoned veterans. And even the unchanging Ferric Jurgen remained with him. When the Chaos adherents ventured towards Purlia, their ships first hit the minefields, then were repelled by the local flotilla, and those heretics who managed to land on the surface came under coordinated laser fire. However, the second wave of Chaos was far more powerful and simply swept away all obstacles. Soon, the improvised army of Purlia was already on the verge of defeat. The Skitarii and the forces of the Inquisition guarding the Shadowlight were prepared to sell their lives dearly. Cain and his colleagues played all the aces they had up their sleeves. In response to the public lies of the governor under Varan's control, the retired Commissar launched an entire campaign of counter-propaganda. One of the Imperium's ships perished, crashing into the ranks of the Chaos fleet and preventing them from destroying the Schola Progenium from orbit. However, Varan had already attacked the Mechanicus sanctuaries, and he was not alone. The Necrons arrived to seize the Shadowlight. Realizing that swift action was needed, Cain sent a proposal to the enemy to meet for a surrender reception. However, at the meeting, the Chaos Warlord was astonished to find that the Commissar was offering for him to accept Cain's surrender. The enraged champion of Chaos ordered his warriors to open fire. However, Ferric Jurgen, the good old pariah Jurgen, as always, came to his master's rescue. His anti-psychic aura threw Varan's fighters into confusion. Cain launched into the attack. He fought as if it were his last and defeated the opponent, then threw him off the dam. But then the Necrons intervened. In the blink of an eye, 3 monoliths annihilated the Chaos minions, and the ancient race took the Shadowlight for themselves. Well, the Necrons hate the warp. Let the best artifact rest with them for now. After this, our impeccable Commissar and his faithful adjutant went on to further serve the Emperor, who sent so many dangers and hardships their way. A new era came to replace them, with new concerns, new soldiers. Well, let us hope they are at least half as valiant as old Kaifos, who so cleverly managed his cowardice that he became a hero of the Imperium. As for how the career and life of the Commissar ended, you can find out for yourself from the books of Sandy Mitchell. Thank you for watching.